I've been asked several times to make a video describing how I make these multi-camera aviation videos. Honestly, I've kind of dodged the issue because it would force me to document the mess of details that have kind of evolved over the years. But with my instructor certificates behind me, I felt like it was time to stop making excuses and just go ahead and make this video. So I hope you find something useful here. Please put your comments or questions below, and also please like and subscribe if you find something useful here. So if you ask 10 different aviation content creators how they make their videos, I'm sure you're going to get at least 20 different answers. I've got two goals in making my videos. One is to share what it's like to fly IFR flights in a modern GA twin, and two, to educate myself on modern video and recording and editing techniques. I've always really been into still photography, but wanted to learn more about video editing. My dad was a film editor at the Australian ABC TV channel in the 60s and 70s, so in a way it's also an opportunity to keep his memory alive. My bias has been to have multiple views, inside and outside the plane, and use editing as kind of a creative tool to highlight what is either most interesting or important at any given time. Many of my videos incorporate 6 video sources in addition to audio, so I've learned a lot about multi-camera editing and how to keep things simple. I mostly use GoPro cameras. Although I have several now, I started with just a couple and bought more as I felt like I was getting more comfortable with recording and editing. I also typically do these solo, so I love having other folks along to help, but I also want the flexibility to be able to just record if it's just me. So that's how I think about the setups. Got to keep them simple. None of this video is sponsored in any way, so it's just my opinion and experiences with the products I mention. And here are the areas I'm going to tackle today: cameras, audio, time synchronization, mounting, both external and internal, iPad, editing, safety, and finally, we'll end with a few other tips and tricks. Before we get started, I want to emphasize the importance of safety. When you're recording in the air or even on the ground, I can't state too emphatically that video recording can present a very serious distraction. Just like we may have to ask a chatty passenger to be quiet during takeoffs and landings, there are times when we just have to ignore the recording, even if it impacts the quality of the video. I've put processes and checklists in place to minimize the recording workload in flight, and I'd urge you to plan in advance for possible recording distractions and how you'll handle them. As always, this video is intended to share how I make these multi-camera aviation videos. It's not intended to be a lesson, so please make your own plans and safety considerations when doing any aviation, still, video, or audio recording. So with that, let's jump into our first topic, cameras. So obviously, this is where everyone starts. I've primarily used GoPro cameras, and while they're not perfect, there is a reason why they've dominated the action camera market for so long. In general, they are reliable for basic recording, and the image quality is excellent. I started with and still use Hero 9s. They're still great and perform well and can be bought inexpensively on the used market. I have other models as well, like the 11, 12, 13. These have some nice features and are certainly worth considering, and you definitely get a lot of camera for about $300 to $500. My settings are as follows: 4K versus 1080p HD. I'm now recording mostly in 4K, and that's 3840 pixels by 2160 pixels. But the majority of my videos on my channel were done in 1080, which is 1920 by 1080 pixels. 4K does look a little better in some shots, but I didn't get any complaints on the 1080 recordings I did, and in many cases, it's pretty hard to tell the difference. 1080 has the advantage of a much smaller file size, reduced heating concerns, and longer battery life. Now that I've worked out how to reliably address these concerns, I like 4K for the slightly better image quality, and maybe more importantly, the ability to crop significantly during editing, while still maintaining decent image quality. Frame rate, so 30 frames per second is what I've settled on. Some folks use 24, and that's fine also. The new GoPros can record at much higher frame rates for slow motion effects. For example, the 13 can record at 4K at up to 240 frames per second. 120 frames per second, and 1080 will go up to 240 frames per second. These are incredible performance stats, but I don't really need it. So I stick with 30 frames per second for smaller file sizes and longer battery life. Wide angle or linear, I prefer traditional looks. The extreme wide setting is great for action sports, but not the view I'm looking for. So for external or cabin shots, I typically use the basic wide angle on the GoPro. This is a nice balance between getting a fairly wide field of view without too much distortion. For recording the G1000 avionics, I use linear, which is narrow but minimizes distortion of the screens. So I've mentioned battery life. In my personal opinion, this is the most significant limitation of the basic GoPro cameras. In aviation use, particularly for external mounted cameras, I want to turn them on before I fire up the engines and turn them off after I shut down at my destination. In the real world, depending on video settings, I've found battery life between 60 and 90 minutes. Obviously, this is very limiting for a typical flight. So this gives us a nice transition to camera accessories. My favorite GoPro accessory that I've discovered provides a great solution to this battery limitation. These Synch batteries are less than $30 on Amazon and really work great. Their performance is so good that I now use them on all my GoPros, externally and in the cabin. If I want to, I can turn them all on for the entire flight. I've done flights up to 2.5 hours with these, and it still appears to have about 30 to 50% of capacity remaining in the batteries. So as you can see, it's easy to mount the GoPros on top of the Synch battery. I've tried other external batteries with much less success. I like these ones for a more compact design, but I've had issues with overheating and the battery just failing to charge the GoPro for reasons I can't explain. Neutral density filters. They're a popular accessory for aviation photography, and for good reason. They can eliminate or at least reduce the weird propeller effects we're used to seeing on videos. By reducing the amount of light getting to the GoPro's sensor, the GoPro is forced to compensate with a slower shutter speed to let more light in during each frame. So the slower shutter speed results in a nice blur in the propeller, and you get rid of the weird look. I use either ND8 or an ND16 filter. The higher the number, the greater the reduction in light getting to the camera sensor, and I really just make this decision on a gut of how bright I expect the conditions to be. If I think it's going to be really bright, really sunny, I'll go with the ND16. If not so much, I'll go with the ND8. Then a camera frame. So I like this small rig frame when I'm mounting the cameras externally. These are intended for mounting other gear on the camera, like microphones or something else. I don't need this, but I do like the extra protection that the frame provides. And it's also relatively inexpensive, at less than $20 on Amazon. Finally, we should talk about the GoPro Quick app for your phone. I found it works well to control the cameras. It allows you to label each camera. I label them with their location on the plane and their serial number, so it's easy to keep track of them. But one big watch out. Although sometimes it works great to control external cameras, I've documented this in a recent video where you can even live stream from these cameras, but it doesn't always work. I strongly recommend you start the external cameras recording before you start your engine or engines, and don't assume you're going to be able to control or stop the external cameras once your engines have started up. The other nice use of the GoPro app is that you can use it for timecode syncing. We haven't talked about timecode. We'll talk about it later in this video, but you can do that through the GoPro Quick app. Now I'll switch to audio. Audio is sometimes a secondary consideration to video, but this is a mistake. I still find getting quality audio really takes work. Poor audio is at least as common as video as a reason for not being able to make quality video. In my earlier videos, it was audio. I got more comments on audio quality than video quality. So what are the basics? The only must-have gear is a headset cable and adapter. This taps into your headset audio and allows you to record both in-cockpit discussions and ATC. An example I use is this in-flight cam audio cable. I've included a link for that below. Then you need to decide if you're going to record on the GoPro itself or use an external audio recorder. And starting with recording on the GoPro camera has a few advantages. Obviously, it's simple. You don't need a separate device. Also, the audio is perfectly synced with the video by the nature of being recorded by the same device. You'll need an adapter like this in-flight cam plug that allows the audio cable plug into the USB-C port on the GoPro. But there are advantages to using a separate device. I find it's more reliable because external devices typically have a way to check your audio levels. Audio plugs are notoriously unreliable, so if a plug is not seated correctly, or a cable is broken, or it's intermittent, you can't see that right away unless you have a way to check audio levels. And that's what these external devices allow you to do. There are several recorder options available. I recommend something like this Deity PR2. The features I like on it are the integrated screen with audio levels, so you can check that everything is working. It has replaceable AA batteries that last several hours. The manufacturer claims about 30 hours of battery life, and that's consistent with what I've seen. And it can be controlled with a mobile app on your phone. Perhaps the most important is the ability to set timecode on the audio file. This makes it much easier to sync with your video files later on. We'll talk about timecode in the next section. There are other audio recording devices from DJI, Rode, and Zoom, amongst others, that are worth checking out. Just make sure that they have an input for a 3.5mm plug, they have a way to visually confirm audio levels, and they have the ability to set timecode. I use the Zoom device as a backup. It works well, but this model doesn't have any timecode capability, so I only use it when I can't use the Deity for some reason. The other thing to mention about recording audio is that the audio file you get from the headset recording has very little background noise. That's nice, but it's not very realistic when you're flying in any small plane. You're always going to hear some background noise from the engines and propellers, so I typically mix in a little audio from one of the cabin cameras. When I'm editing, I do this at a low level so it doesn't impact the dialogue, but I find it sounds much more realistic in the final video. So timecode. What is it? What's timecode that I've been talking about? Simplistically, it's a way to add frame level time synchronization to video and audio files. When done properly, it can save hours when it comes to editing. Without it, you can easily spend ages lining up all your files in your video editing software. With accurate timecodes, it takes just a few minutes or less, but it does take some setup. There is an old school way to do it with either clapping, 1, 2, 3, or even a movie clapboard. When using clapping and you have 3 audio spikes in your audio file and a recording of hands clapping on the video, it's pretty simple to get things aligned. I've done many videos this way. There are a few problems, though, that crop up in aviation recording. For one, it may not be possible for the external cameras to hear or see the claps, especially cameras on the tail or on the long wings of a DA42. And even in the cabin with significant background noise we have in airplanes, the audio spikes might get lost in that noise on the camera or audio files. So how do we set up timecode on the GoPro cameras? Timecode capability is built into the newer GoPro 12 and 13. And the good news is that it's also possible to enable timecode on the older GoPros with the GoPro Labs software. You need to install that. This is an external software that's available from GoPro, and it's for models 11, 10, 9, and 8. They can all get GoPro Labs. I've installed it on my 11s and 9s, and the timecode works well. You synchronize the timecode on each GoPro camera using a QR code on your phone that you access via either the app or the GoPro Labs website, depending on what software you're using. This needs to be done for each camera before you start recording, but it usually only takes a few seconds. It's worth noting that in my experience also, the synchronization is not perfectly accurate after about an hour, and you get a little bit of drift. So towards the end of a longer video, you may need to adjust the video and audio synchronization just by a few frames. How do we set it up on the microphone? Well, if you're using the Deity audio recorder, it's really simple. You set up timecode directly on their Sidus audio app. There's no need for a QR code for the Deity. So let's switch to mounting the GoPros. So the external mounts. I recommend being very cautious about mounting cameras externally on your plane. You can get great shots, and that's why we do it, but the risk of damaging the plane or persons or property on the ground is real and needs to be carefully addressed. This said, I've not had any problems with the devices I've used, and my favorite at the moment is the in-flight cam ball mount. This is permanently attached to either a single screw or multiple screws on this spanner plate, and links for both of these are in the notes below. Since these are permanently mounted, they require an A&P mechanic sign-off and a logbook entry reflecting a minor alteration in the airframe. In-Flight Cam's done a really good job of this by including information on their website for your A&P, and they've also included records of their communications with the FAA on the topic. I've gotten inspections and logbook entries for these mounts on my plane, and it's just taken a few minutes with my mechanic. Just one other point about this mount. If you are buying it, make sure you buy the newer version. The older version has 2 Allen keys that work okay, but the screws tended to strip over time. The new one doesn't seem to have this problem. Another mount, which is temporary, but I've had good success with, is the My Pilot Pro mount. It mounts on a tie-down eye on the airframe. This is what it looks like there. It has the advantage of being temporary, so it doesn't require an A&P inspection or a logbook entry. I've done several videos with this mount and found it to be very secure. All that said, I now prefer the in-flight cam mounts just because they're quicker to get the camera on and off, and they do feel a little bit more secure on the plane. So let's switch to in-cabin mounts. Now these are easier, but still require care and attention. I've used 3 different locations, and sometimes I've all 3 recording simultaneously. They are 1, looking forward from behind the cabin seats. This is kind of the classic cockpit view. You get to see some of the view forward, out the cockpit, as well as some of the activity inside the cockpit. Getting the exposure right can be difficult since you've got a really bright outside scene and also in the cockpit, which is much darker. But the GoPros actually do a pretty decent job at balancing this. The second view is the cabin side looking at the pilot or pilots. This captures the pilot flying and talking to the camera. This is the most important recording to sync with audio. When the pilot is speaking, even a slight difference in timing between the video and the audio can be very distracting to the viewer. And the third location is the GoPro focused on the G1000. Since I'm trying to show in my videos what it's like to fly a twin diamond, the avionics are really important to include. However, for a video that's focused on outside views, you may not need this. So how do I actually mount these cameras? For the forward-looking view behind the seats, I've used a simple RAM mount with a clasp. The Diamond has a handhold in a perfect location, which makes it pretty easy to set this up and to mount it and take it down. The RAM mounts are arguably the most common articulated mounts, and they're widely available. Just a caution, though, that I have found that the RAM suction mounts are prone to falling off mid-flight, and I'll show you a better solution right now. This for the camera mount on the side, on the second location, looking back at the pilot or pilots. I use the My GoFlight Flex suction mount. This has a built-in pump that shows when the suction is starting to drop off and allows you to quickly re-establish suction just with a simple press. These are pricey, but they do work really well, and I've found them to be much more reliable at maintaining suction than the RAM mounts. The third location for the camera recording is the G1000. I go back to the RAM clamp and articulating arm for this. Once again, the Diamond has a convenient place for the clamp, and it's quite secure. As I mentioned earlier, I set the GoPro to linear view to minimize distortion on the G1000. The final video source is the iPad. iPads have become absolutely ubiquitous in the cockpit over the last few years, and apps like ForeFlight and Garmin Pilot, which provide moving maps, airport information, weather, instrument charts, and so on. So providing a screen capture of the iPad can be very useful to provide the viewer with the same information that the pilot has. Also, I sometimes use them to provide the viewer with situational awareness of where we are on the route or an approach chart. So fortunately, recording the iPad screen is super easy. You just pull down the menu on the top right, press the record button, and then repeat this to turn it off. Then the files upload to iCloud when you're back on Wi-Fi, and you can download them from there. Finally, editing. So some of my goals in putting this video together is to help you get the raw materials, either video or audio files, in a form that makes them easy to edit. I'm not going to go into detail on any of the editing software itself. It's really a huge topic, and there's a ton of training material already available on platforms like YouTube. I use Premiere Pro, and it has great tools for multi-camera editing. I know a lot of folks really like DaVinci and Final Cut, so you can make your own decision here. I've included a link below to a content creator called Premiere Gal and one of her tutorials on multi-camera editing. That's a really good place to start. So safety. We've talked about this a bit already, but let me go into a bit more detail here. The first topic is distraction. As you've already seen, there's just a lot involved in making multi-camera recordings. But just like we encourage our passengers to not distract us during critical phases of flight, we should set up our recording systems to not distract us during taxi, takeoff, departure, arrival, landing, etc. My goal is to not have anything to do with any of the recording equipment. It's not common, but a few times I've had a camera mount fall off the windshield inside the cockpit. My response is just to let it sit until I'm in a non-critical phase of flight, or I can turn the autopilot on or something like that. For example, fixing anything to do with a recording is always secondary to flying the plane. And what about mounting the cameras externally? Although the modern mounts are very reliable, it's certainly possible for a camera to come loose in flight. The main concern I have in this scenario is damaging the airframe or compromising flight controls. And to mitigate this, I only mount cameras in locations where if they did come off or come loose, they would depart without any risk of hitting the airframe, and particularly not hit anything to do with any of the control surfaces. And so just to wrap up, here are a few other tips and tricks I've picked up along the way. First one is practicing. I think you've seen in this tutorial that there are a lot of steps that all have to go right to get a successful multi-camera recording of your flight. There will be some special flights where you really want to get a great recording. And in these cases, I strongly recommend doing a complete practice run beforehand. Just like we would practice for a check ride or another important flight, doing a full run-through, preferably with everything set up and doing it in flight or at least on the ground, greatly enhances the chance of success. Another tip is to put together your own checklists. If you've watched any of my videos, you know that I'm a big proponent of checklists. With all the systems we have to manage during flight, checklists are absolutely critical to ensure we haven't missed anything. Multi-camera video recording adds another really complex system to our mission, so it makes sense to use checklists for it as well. Missing just one step during a dream flight you want to record can make the entire recording useless, so I encourage you to develop some simple checklists for your own flight. Another tip is consideration of people's privacy for anyone who might be joining you on the flight. If anyone is going to be in the video, whether it be a friend, a flight instructor, or even an Angel Flight West passenger, I always ask well before the flight and make it clear that if they're not totally comfortable with it, I just won't do the recording. In my opinion, I feel it's poor form to put someone on the spot right before the flight and say, "Are you okay with this?" I would much rather give them time in advance for them to say no or to think about it and ask any questions. I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. I suspect that I've probably generated as many questions as I've answered, so feel free to post any that you have in the comments below. No doubt others will have the same questions. Also, I'd love to see your multi-camera aviation videos that you make. Thank you very much and hope you enjoyed it.